thought we'd start really talking about what happened, because I think
Okay.
that's really important to know the sequence of events that happened when you had your heart attack, and what
Mm,
happened soon after.
sure. Yeah. So I mean, I can sort of start at the beginning of the, the I, I guess one of my first heart attacks. It was a series of heart attacks that happened, and I think giving context to the conversation. I am a deputy head at a prep school, and so it's a busy job, but I would and this was my, I think, one of the things that was a real misconception for me early on in this was the fact that I when I thought of stress and people who had stressful jobs, it wasn't my job I was thinking of. I was thinking of, city traders who are trading in the millions and billions of pounds, and they have so much um, uh, to win or lose. And I've seen enough films to sort of paint that picture in my mind. Uh, and so I had never thought of my job as stressful, but what it is it's full and it's busy. And from the time I get to school to the time I finish, it's running. You're making thousands of decisions within the space of a day, and you're constantly on the move, dealing with various different issues. And you pair that with a slight intensity in the way you like to do life and move through life and do things. Uh, that inevitably puts stress on your body. But at that point, I hadn't sort of paired any of that together. I had just in my mind assumed that this is life, and I can handle this. And I remember my mom at one point, this was years ago, probably about 6 or 7 years ago. She'd come to visit in the summer, and we were doing various different things. And she was watching me whizzing around doing whatever I do in life. And she says, "Jeff, you better slow down, or something's gonna happen to you. You're gonna have a heart attack or something." And I sort of guffawed and sort of said, "Oh, come on, Mom." Yeah. And I literally felt invincible. And I think there's this whole invisible world that we don't see. But going back to when this all sort of went a bit pear-shaped, it was December 2020. We were getting ready for our Christmas services and our nativity play, and I remember sort of I'd been running around doing stuff. This was sort of already in the midst of COVID, and I ran down to my office, and a teacher, she came to talk to me, and I sat down in my chair. And as I sat down, I could feel my chest, this feeling in my chest. And it was sort of a tightness. It felt as though I had sort of pulled my muscles, and then I felt down my forearms, this incredible sensation, as though I had been doing physical labor. And it felt like I'd been carrying bags of cement all day, and I'd pulled muscles. And I remember I was just sitting there sort of rubbing my forearms, and this staff member was chatting to me, and I can remember looking at her. I don't remember a thing she had said, and the only thing that was consuming me was this feeling in my chest and down my forearms, and I was sort of rubbing, and I could feel perspiration sort of starting to pock my forehead. It was just this sort of real intensity, and I just wanted her to leave, and I wanted to stretch because I thought that's what I needed, this new tightness. And then I in my head I clicked. I thought, this is a new symptom of COVID we had not seen before. And so I when she left, this sort of feeling of ease as I sort of got up, and I started to stretch out my chest and my forearms. And then the pain subsided. I thought, oh gosh, that is really, really weird. And so I just continued on. And then after work, I went to collect my girls, and I'd had a bit of a heated conversation in that sort of pickup, and I could feel my whole body shaking, and it was bizarre. I just felt this whole sort of trembling all over my body that I'd not sort of experienced before. I got the girls in the car. We got back to the flat that we were staying at the time, and I could, as I walked up the stairs, this feeling came on again, and it was a slow sort of tightness creeping across my chest, and felt like these cords pulling really tight. And then my forearms started to go, and I started to really rub my forearms, and then a new sensation came. I could feel up the side of my neck, and it was just up the one side, but then it sort of spread across my teeth, and it was the most extraordinary thing. I could feel each and every one of my teeth separately, and I knew exactly, I could have counted it by just the feeling of my teeth and the super sensation of my teeth. And I thought I need to stretch. So I went out of that room and went into the bathroom, and I started to stretch, and I couldn't get rid of the pain. So I was on the floor at one point. My arm was twisted behind me, and I'm really trying to get this pain out of the way. And I thought, this is some crazy flu sensation that's hitting me. And then at that moment, my youngest daughter, she came in, and she saw me on the floor, and she said, "Daddy, what are you doing? Are you stretching?" I said, "Oh yeah, just stretching."
Wow.
A bit tight. And of course, this yeah, grown up male machismo that you don't want to show weakness, especially to your kids. You don't want them to see you in there. So I just said, "Yeah, don't worry about it. It's just daddy stretching again, just keeping fit."
Wow.
So she left, and then again it subsided. And these sort of episodes lasted, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, and then just eased. But this time there was sort of a lingering feeling underneath. And then I was on FaceTime with my mum that evening. She's in Canada, and I was talking to her, and then the girls got involved, and then it came on again. And it was this sort of almost supersized intensity. There may have been, felt like there was like 3 or 4 chords before, but this time it was a sensation like there's hundreds of chords just squeezing my chest, and my arms started to throb, and the teeth started to come again. And I was in the background just sort of rubbing my chest, and my mom spotted me on FaceTime, and she said, "Jeff, are you all right?" And I sort of said, yeah, I think I've got COVID or something. There's this feeling of tightness across my chest. I think this is some new thing. And at that point, we had heard all sorts of different side effects of having COVID. And my mom said, "That doesn't look right. You should call the hospital." And I said, "Come on, mom, it's just a flu. You don't need to call the hospital." She says, "You need to. And if you don't do it, I'm going to hang up, and I'm going to call Anna, and I'm going to get her to call." So Anna's my wife. So she hung up, and my eldest daughter at that point, she came over to me. She said, "Dad," and her big blue eyes sort of stared me straight into my eyes. And she said, "Please just call the doctors." And I thought, okay, I'll call the doctors. I'll show you what it means to really sort of take care of yourself. This was going to be a lesson on how to take care.
And never at any point did it occur to you that you were having a heart attack during
No,
this period of time. That's
no,
really interesting.
because heart attacks don't happen to people my age. And if they do, it's people that are sort of morbidly unhealthy, and again, my only sort of reference was the films. And when you watch films in heart attacks and that's when they have cardiac arrest, they drop to the floor, and that's it. But I hadn't realized heart attacks can come in different layers, and really what was going on inside the piping to cause that. So yeah, no, I had no idea. It didn't. When I got onto the phone, and I called 111, not 999, because I just wanted to just run it by the someone who had some medical knowledge. And when I had talked to them for maybe, a minute and a half explaining about this flu that I had, she stopped me and she said, I'm going to stop you right there. There is an ambulance on the way. I want to know if you can get down to the front door. And by that point,
Wow.
the the pain had subsided, and I was saying, look, I am all right. I promise you, I'm all right. And she says, no, I think we need to have you checked. There is an ambulance on its way. And miraculously, I mean, we're hearing waiting times now of hours for an ambulance. It was there within minutes. And so I walked downstairs and opened the front door, and I walked out to the ambulance, and I was apologizing profusely for wasting their time. And they said, well, let's just get you in here and have a look. And so they hooked me up to their monitors and made a bunch of readings. And then they said, we're going to hospital. I said, hospital, are you sure? They said, yes. I said, okay, well, I'll drive. You got much more important stuff to do. I'll drive down there. And then they said, no, you're not driving. If you want to go in and grab a bag with some clothes or something, you can do that. But we're taking you. So I went inside, I grabbed my backpack, and it happened to have my laptop and my drawing stuff in it, and off I went to hospital.
Wow. I mean, it really strikes me that you're having all these signs and signals and what have you, and yet there's a sort of disconnect that the heart somehow is not involved in these referred. We call them referred sensations or pains and stuff. So sometimes an organ will refer it to a different part of the body, and you can often kind of tell, if appendicitis is the lower right corner of the abdomen, and sometimes generally in the abdomen. So with the heart referring to the muscles, you would immediately jump to the assumption that somehow this has got to be muscular, and how on earth could it affect your arm, right? And actually the teeth sensation makes perfect sense to me, but it's really interesting hearing your description of it. And so I think this is really useful for people listening in, whoever they are, if they're experiencing symptoms like this themselves, or they're spotting, like your daughter did and your mother did, spotting symptoms like this as an observer, is that, look, this is a bit more than just a muscular complaint or a COVID complaint or whatever, however you want to label it. So it's really fascinating, and I can see in your responses my own kind of the machoism that comes with being a man, and I think that it's interesting that heart disease and heart attacks affects women as well as men, obviously, and in fact some stats say that there are more women than men having heart attacks and cardiac problems. So and I think it'd be interesting to get a woman's perspective on that, to see whether they'd be a bit more honest and open about, I'm having these pains, so therefore it's much more serious than that, so let's take myself along to the hospital, get it checked out. Whereas we immediately go into denial. So it's interesting how that kind of played out in real time.
Well, I think we definitely don't I think, just as a gross generalization, don't like to face up to the fact that there's any sort of weakness within us, or it's and there's a sense of ambition as well, and any sort of health issue in some way gets in the way of ambition, and and it's this sort of survival instinct where you want to allow these desires to soar up, and you want to push away anything that's interfering with that.
So you're whizzed off to the hospital. Presumably you're straight into A&E, and then you're hooked up to monitors, and you're probably just sitting or lying there thinking, well, this is a bit strange.
It's not only strange, Kevin. It was it's such a sobering experience to find yourself in a position like that, because as a 46-year-old man, I remember sitting distinctly. I was sitting on one of the gurneys. I'd sort of earned my place in one of these cubicles, and surrounding me with these synthetic blue curtains. And you could hear all the sounds outside in the ER, and there was moaning and crying. You could hear doctors trying to diagnose information, squeaky wheels. You heard all these sounds, and I remember sitting there with my backpack on my chest, and I was clutching it on my chest, and I was scared. There was a sense of fear deep inside me, and again, because it was COVID, no guests were allowed in. I mean, I couldn't have anyone there with me, so it was just me. And I remember not knowing the fact that I was in hospital, and this lady on the phone had stopped the conversation and called an ambulance. The fact that the ambulance attendants insisted that they take me to the hospital now. They were it told me that something wasn't right, and yet in the back of my mind I kept hoping that I was going to be out in a couple of hours, and this was all going to be a silly joke. But there was also something that was very scary, and I think that night of feeling the intensity of fear really awoke something in me, that's a real human feeling, and I would suspect that when people experience these traumatic experiences, this is why they are life-changing, is because it raises these emotions inside you that you had never expected before.
And how long was it before you actually found out it was a heart attack?
Yeah, so it was probably about 2 or 3 hours before the on-call doctors got me. And I remember the doctor brought me into this little room next to where I was sitting. I sat down, and there's this marvelous moment where he came in, and he pushed his spectacles up his nose, and he looked up at me, and I could see the reds around his eyes. In that moment, I knew, this man has sort of experienced some serious, he's been working hard, and you can see the exhaustion deep in his eyes. He looked down at his keyboard, and he pecked on there, this with one finger. I could hear it really loudly. And then he looked up at his screen and then swiveled over to me, and so matter-of-factly said, well, Mr. Schmidt, it looks like you've had a heart attack, likely a series of heart attacks.
Wow.
And I felt that drop into the pit of my stomach. I could not believe what he had just told me. And at that point, I don't think I had really thought that this might have anything to do with my heart. I was waiting for something around COVID or some nasty flu, and that was a hard pill to swallow. And he said, you'll need to be in here now for a few nights until we can arrange for the rest of the tests. And just like that, I ended up in hospital, and ended up being there for 6 days. And being in hospital, that's another whole story in and of itself. This most extraordinary place to be in. And because it was not just a night I was in, and then a few tests, and then I was discharged. I really had the opportunity to see what life was like, on the ward, and watching the comings and goings, and you get used to the rhythms, and one of the amazing things from this heart attack and being in hospital, it was as though there was senses inside me that were so heightened, and I just became so attuned to the world around me in those wards. And I was bumped from one ward to another, and I came across a huge spectrum of people. And in some ways, it starts to become a real security blanket, the hospital. And I had the good fortune of being bumped from one ward to another with 2 other guys who were also in there with heart issues. So I became good mates with them, and said they became my little family. But then watching the great variety, it's a great leveler ending up in hospital, because you're in there with a huge spectrum of people. You know, the guy beside me at one on the first night, they had found him wandering naked the streets of Streatham, and he ended up there. And then across the room from me, there was I called him the libertarian, because he says he works in the House of Lords, and you know, he would talk about Parliament, and he had an opinion on everything. And you have this huge spectrum of people. And I think one of the things that really struck me in there is you have this spectrum of people, and so many of them were so ungrateful for their for whatever was happening, and there was this sort of flow of complaints, and in my head I was thinking, gosh, you are in one of the best medical systems on earth, and it's, you know, it's free. It's you know, you have free access to this, and they are serving you, and you can plainly see that none of these nurses have spare time, and they're just not chit chat. They're constantly flowing to and fro, and the doctors are worked off their feet, and just seeing humanity. And I remember one of the guys that had his heart issue that was with me. I remember him, it seemed to be a wave of this negativity flowing through, and I thought, how did the nurses even survive this? And I remember it was just a few really kind words, and he just said, "Thank you, Michelle. It's really lovely to have you here." And
Wow.
you could see the nurse's whole persona. And can you imagine just those few little words changing her world? And that's how little gratitude I think they had had. So being in hospital, it was inevitably an amazing place.
Yeah, I mean, you strike me as being normally a very in tune person, in tune with their emotions, and you know, in tune with nature, in tune with your family and stuff. And yet, actually, this kind of event just seemed to turn the volume up, that sensitivity in a big way. So I'm just interested, because obviously in the book, there are a lot of illustrations on this, and it's kind of really interesting to me to kind of just have a look at the pictures, because the pictures were full of life and emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, I don't know whether I'll just kind of show this on screen, this image of you with touching your chest here, and I thought that just captured so much in the drawing and the colours of it. So I'm just wondering, what point did you think, right, I'm going to start sketching and I'm going to start painting my reality, if you like?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So I had, I mean, I've always been a bit of a creative at heart. You know, you slice me down the center, and I think that you'd find this sort of love of creativity oozing out of me. But I had, it had been a long time since I'd sort of done recreational, just for fun sketching. And the summer of 2020, I had just come across this sort of little movement called urban sketching, and it really caught my attention. And basically, it's sort of in the moment trying to capture a place you're in, the emotions, the buzz of that. And I just sort of started doing that in the autumn, and going to cafes and catching the buzz of what's happening there. And so when I grabbed my backpack and brought it to hospital, my sketchbook and my watercolors were in there. And when I started to make these observations, they were so visceral that I felt I had to record it in some way. And so I pulled up my sketch pad, and the first thing I remember sketching while I was there is just this ward, and trying to capture all the things that were happening as much as I could, just in a little panorama of the ward. And you know, as I was doing that, and I think this is one of the powers of sketching and drawing, is you've got this hyper focus on what you're doing, and your mind sort of goes off into places, and you process things. It's so you find yourself in this other world. And so I wanted to capture what was going on around, because it was, I could just feel it so strongly. And then I started to write about it as well, because I felt the pictures in and of themselves weren't there. I had to tell the story of these. And so I started to record these little vignettes. And I remember sharing them with my wife. And she says, "Oh, Jeff, you got to share this on social media." And so I set up a little social media channel and just started to share the journey of what was happening through that. And people were responding, and it was interesting to hear how different people responded. And medical people, they were incredibly relieved to hear the story told from about them, their perspective, what's happening there. And I remember that I was sitting in bed just doing the sketches, and I love to, part of when you're doing this, you can strike up conversations, especially if you're drawing someone, and as you're drawing them, they inevitably want to see, and so you have this little dialogue. But I remember one of the nurses coming over to me, and she was coming to give me my next lot of pills, and she looked over and she said, "I saw you working well. I didn't realize what you're doing." And she said, "This is amazing. Can I take the book?" And she practically pulled it out of my book. Out of my hands. And I said, "Yeah, that would be fine." She ran out of the ward. And I didn't see her for another, 30, 40 minutes. And then she came back in, and she was sort of beaming away. And she said, "Thank you so much for sharing this." She says, "We've just shared it all over the hospital intranet, and everyone loves it. They're loving the story being told." And
Wow.
it was lovely to be able to tell the story of what happens in hospital, and capturing those moments. And I think because I was feeling so hypersensitive to everything, I felt I had to record these moments.
Yeah, and the irony of this all happening during COVID lockdown, when you couldn't have any visitors, you were totally isolated, and actually what was going on in the realms within the hospital walls actually was almost a bit of a secret in itself. And obviously, you see some kind of some film on the news or whatever it is, but actually being in the hospital bed, experiencing it from the inside, I think was really quite revealing. What we're going to do with this kind of podcast is to split it down into kind of segments and parts, so that it's easier to kind of watch and listen. And so we're just going to have a pause here before we move on to part two. I think there's 4 or 5 parts of this, and then obviously we'll be posting them as a sequence of discussions. So I think what we've gone through is, we say here that health is a story, not a symptom. And so, and often as not, you will see I see my colleagues sometimes just talking about symptoms. If I look at the drug chart or the manuals that go with each of the prescription drugs or over-the-counter drugs, it's very kind of functional. It's very, CVA, cardiovascular event. This drug does X, Y, and Z, and the side effects are X, Y, and Z, and the dose is this. So it's very kind of linear. It's very compartmentalized, and it's very inhuman in some respects. It's very it dumbs stuff down to very small compartments. And actually, what this story I think is all about, from my perspective anyway, is actually it's showing how there's a whole kind of environment around a symptom, and which involves not just a physicality. Yes, you had a heart attack, and yes, there was a blocked artery, and yes, you had all these procedures and all the follow-up from that. But actually, the reality of the experience and the intensity of the experience and what that meant, and the lessons that came out of those experiences are really, really important. Perhaps just as important as the treatments themselves. And actually what we try to do here at the Naked Pharmacy is we try to get behind the symptom. So what's been going on in your environment? What happened as a lead up to this? Was there a time in your life when you think, actually, before this, I didn't have these symptoms, and I was completely well, but actually I could see that snowball. So I can start to see the narrative, the story, and start to understand it, what led to that. And the problem for pharmacists, I won't talk about doctors, but pharmacists, we're very trained on scientific studies, and actually some of the story element to this is not scientific. You won't find a randomized control trial of the impact of emotions and on heart attack risk, the impact of diet, nutrition. I mean, although that's starting to change. So actually what we're going to dig into behind all this is what are the contributing factors, and so what's the story behind it. I think we've kind of touched on that a little bit, and so we'll just pause here, and then part two we'll go into a bit more story.
Yeah. So just before you pause, Kevin, if I just can add this one little bit to the you talking about sort of looking at some of the symptoms. It reminds me of a conversation I once had with a First Nations healer back in Canada. And I just remember him saying something to the extent of, when a plant is sick, we don't look at the plant, we look at the surroundings. And that's always sort of struck me, you know, if I've got a plant that's dying here at home, you know, I'm trying to figure out, you know, what I can do that. I'm not really paying attention to the surroundings around it, but those surroundings ultimately is what led to the death of that plant or the sickness of that plant. And so too it is with us.
Yeah, I totally get it, and I think it's actually science catching up with nature, really, not the other way around. That actually we're realizing the interconnectedness of everything, and internal and external. And who'd have thought teeth would be so connected to the heart? I mean, you know, that's kind of crazy. That doesn't make any sense. But actually, if you think about it, if I think about it from a pharmacist's perspective, we give antibiotics post-dental treatment, particularly where there's an extraction, because of the risk of heart valve infection from dental treatment. So therefore, that shows you that these two areas, the gum, the blood supply to it, and the nervous supply to it, is closely connected to the So you know, and I think the problem with thinking in boxes, being trained in boxes, in compartments, is that sometimes you're not taught to connect those compartments together, and you're constantly zooming down into a symptom. I've seen this done with AI as well. It's these automated bots where they're zooming down into little compartments. So have you got this symptom? And if you're not careful, you'll miss the bigger picture here. So I'm fascinated to see what comes out the next phase of discussions, and I'm particularly fascinated about some of the artwork here, because I think there are elements, subtle elements in here which you communicate in terms of the artwork, which really struck me. You know, I think this kind of connection between our emotions and how we're feeling, you know, and our symptoms, our physiology, what's going on in the functional body, is really fundamental. And if we're in a situation where we're blocking that because the emotion is too much to deal with, or we don't understand the emotion, or we just haven't got time to deal with the emotion. And in science, we're told to eliminate emotion. You need to be emotionless when making this objective decision. And actually, that's not I don't agree with that philosophy. I think that's kind of taking away half of the important story